Hello and welcome to IABM TV. I'm Lorenzo Zanni, Head of Knowledge at IABM. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Kavita Anand, who is IP and Rights Management Practice Lead at OnPrem Solution Partners, which is a specialist company part of the Qvest Group. Kavita, I know you're based in California, and this is super early for you. So many thanks for being with us today. It is super appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to discuss developments in rights management with Kavita. So let's get started. Kavita, there's been a significant increase in content owner investment on rights management solutions. What is driving this from your perspective?
Yes, we've seen an exponential increase in rights management projects, and all content owners have had a need to better manage their rights. And what's driving this is that the industry has gone through a transformation, right? As we know, consumption patterns are changing. It used to be that content owners, broadcasters, studios, news organizations used to be able to dictate what content was out there available for consumption. But in today's world, consumers expect to be able to search for and watch any piece of content they want anytime and in any form. And they want it to work on any device as well. And so as a result of this, the content owner's monetization of their IP becomes dependent on the speed at which they can determine who has access to their content and when and where. And that is what makes rights management a core capability, right? So in the new world of digital entertainment, anytime, anywhere, any device, you need to automate that digital supply chain, and rights management, which used to be an administrative function, now becomes a strategic differentiator. I think that's really what's driving it.
Thanks, Kavita. No, that's interesting because you talked about the expectations of consumer driving that change, which is, what's driving most change in the industry as well. In 2020, when most businesses were cutting back or not doing well, the OP rights management practice flourished and grew. Why do you think this was?
Right. And again, the industry was already changing from content owner driven to consumer driven at that time. In 2020 specifically, content producers couldn't produce content for several months. And so everybody was really scrambling to maximize revenue from the content they already had or that they had rights to. And so those that had the robust rights systems were able to find creative ways to make more revenue from just existing content. Those that didn't realized the value of having rights management systems. And so they used this opportunity to upgrade their foundational systems. For OnPrem, luckily in 2019, we saw the changes in the industry and we anticipated the growing needs for rights management projects. So we had already started ramping up our rights practice at the beginning of that year. So we were prepared for that 2020 growth, really. And of course, now we have one of the most significant rights management practices in the US.
That's great. And that's very interesting to hear about this change caused by the pandemic, the specific change. Let's talk a little bit about rights management systems. Are they easy or very difficult to implement from your perspective?
It depends. Right. So usually what we find is that companies are in two different situations. Either they have paper contracts tucked away in their offices, which, believe it or not, many companies still have this. And of course, it's an inefficient way to manage rights and obviously, most importantly, access rights information. And what happens is that without these centralized databases, the employees begin to track information in spreadsheets, they have offline trackers, and the information quickly proliferates. And the data is really difficult to search and understand. And of course, sometimes outdated and inaccurate. Sometimes the second place we find some of our clients is that they may have one or two systems, but that they're siloed. Maybe they're for one business unit, and then the other business unit either has paper or another system. And so really the ease of implementation depends on the size of the company and the number of systems and ways that they look up rights right now, right? So if you have a small to medium-sized company, usually merging these rights systems and implementing a rights management system is fairly manageable. There are many tools out there that have flexible solutions. And the success of this type of a project is really based on the quality of the requirements, implementation strategy, and methodology. Where it's a bigger challenge is a bigger company where you may have many of these systems and processes. And so usually it's a massive effort. And also to have an end-to-end solution in a bigger company, usually you'll have to integrate with a core financial system or digital asset management system. And so here, of course, the quality of the requirements and the implementation strategy and methodology are even more important. But I think in addition to that, because of the scale of this type of a transformation, again, we said rights is a core capability. What you need is support and commitment, almost sponsorship from top executives, right? So you need a real understanding of the value of an enterprise rights solution and why it's important. And you need that to come from the top. And that's how we find that, it makes these systems easier to implement.
Yeah. No, you mentioned a lot of interesting points. At the end, the fact that you need, some clear values when it comes to technology investment at the top, but also that it depends on a lot of variables, including the scale of the company. But when the scale grows and the complexity grows, you mentioned that there needs to be a massive effort. Where the content owners can begin in that scenario?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to figure out where to begin. So we typically see the effort separated into 5 distinct areas. There's title and IP management, or like content catalog, if you will. There's rights in, and then there's deal management, contract lifecycle management, and rights out. So most clients start with the title management and rights in, because that's really getting an understanding of what you own and what you can sell, right? And so, and then they continue with the other pieces of it. In addition, what's important for all of this is to start to standardize rights terminology across the enterprise. And if possible, start to standardize deal terms across the enterprise. Because one of the things that you are going to have to do when a rights management system is implemented is you are going to have to standardize that, and you're going to have to prepare for the automation of the workflows, right? And configure a scalable system. So the sooner you start doing that, the better, because chances are thousands of contracts, it's going to be a massive effort. And then, of course, when you automate rights management, that's when you see the value of an enterprise rights solution.
Thanks, Kavita. And you've already talked about some challenges, but can you give us an overview of some of the major challenges you think content owners can expect when implementing a rights management system?
Right. So besides what I mentioned before about sponsorship from the top and just making sure, that the value of the system is understood, I think there are 2 things that stand out. One is change, right? And the other is data. So change is related to that sponsorship. So change means getting used to doing things in a different way from how you've always done it for years, right? And it sounds simple, but of course it's not simple. And so what we found is that when an enterprise goes through a rights transformation, people have to get used to new ways of not only searching the data, but even entering the data. And that's not always easy. And so to be successful, what you have to have is a change management strategy and methodology that's going in parallel with the implementation. And a change management methodology or strategy takes the client through that change curve. I'm talking about the Kübler-Ross change curve, which starts with resistance and denial, and it ends with learning and integration. So if you do it right, by the time you implement your system and you're in user acceptance testing, you already have the users ready for that change and ready to accept the way their day-to-day is going to change, right? So that's really important piece of it, even though it runs in parallel to the actual implementation. The next is the data. Data is always the long pull of an implementation, but in particular for rights implementations. Because if you think about rights contracts and all the territories, formats, versions of content, all the combinations of potential licenses, it's endless, right? So not only do you have to be able to design a system that allows you to represent all of your current contracts and make them scalable for the future consumption patterns, but you also have to translate what you have today into that system. And of course, that's always a massive effort. Can be accomplished with, again, the right methodology and of course, experience.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's great. It's interesting that a lot of the challenges are business challenges. You mentioned called culture,
Yep.
And change management as well. It's interesting to hear about data, and also in terms of the fact that a lot of media businesses are expanding internationally at the moment. So it makes sense that this is becoming a strategic area. In terms of the technology, are there software companies that provide a comprehensive solution to support these evolving needs?
Yeah, there's several companies out there that provide rights management solutions, and each of them has strengths and weaknesses, as you can imagine. And that said, like, they're mostly all positioned to scale at the pace of the industry transforming. But if you consider the end-to-end rights management workflow, from acquiring rights to selling rights and all of the behind the scenes accounting needs, one tool would have to have a lot of strengths to actually meet all of those needs. So what we often find is that one tool really doesn't provide a comprehensive end-to-end solution, and you have to integrate more than one tool to cover all of those functional areas, from sales and legal, rights management core, and then the accounting and finance pieces.
Yeah. So the usual industry dilemma between best of breed and end-to-end. Also, according to our research, most media companies in the industry usually prefer best of breed, although it changes from case to case, of course. We talked about, you've talked about a lot of topics in rights management. To conclude this interview, I wanted to ask you, what else would you consider when planning rights management strategies and implementations?
So there are, I think, a few other things that you should consider. One is, what are your short and long-term goals, and how ready your organization is for change? Again, it's never too early to start that sponsorship from the top and explaining that value of why we want to do what we want to do. And then end-to-end solutions are massive undertakings, as we just talked about. And so sometimes the best way to get them implemented is through iterations, right? So depending on your short and long-term goals, you can prioritize those iterations. And then lastly, I think it's important to find the right partner. So for example, in the last few years, OnPrem has successfully completed 9 rights management tool implementations, and along with complex data conversions. So we really have a perfected methodology, and all our clients benefit from that experience. So every project is obviously not the same, but our methodology takes our clients through a step-by-step process of analyzing where they are currently, identifying their pain points, and prioritizing based on their short and long-term goals, so that the enterprise can reach where they want to be with respect to rights management.
Thanks so much, Kavita, for sharing all these insights on rights management with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.